Before we get into today's video, please quickly check below to see if you've subscribed. It's totally free and allows you to never miss one of our videos.
None of the aliens could remember if there was a time when they didn't visit Earth to abduct humans for food, fun, or experiments, but they would always remember the day the humans finally snapped. For humans, it was July 7th, 2045, but for the conglomeration of aliens belonging to the foremost empire, it was known as the Earthling Chaos. The memorial hall of the foremost was filled with the names of those slain on that bloody day. The Sisrath inscribed a monument of pure memorite with the number of their casualties when the Earthlings tore their ships apart with weapons centuries behind theirs. When the bat-like Veilleur told scary stories at night to frighten their young, tales of horrific acts committed by humans in their efforts to rid their homeworld of alien raiders was a favorite. The rest of the galaxy called it the Day of Retribution, for many other species had suffered the callous raids of the Empire and were glad to hear of an upstart race dealing them a black eye. But though none of the aliens would ever forget that day, none could know how it started, with a single man whom fortune had long abandoned. Larry Summons was not a lucky man, but prior to waking up in the guts of an alien ship, he had always assumed there had to be some sort of limit to how bad his luck could get. That basic belief just kept getting challenged. He'd lost most of his friends during the Third War in the Gulf, his job when he returned to the States, his wife when he walked in on her with the neighbor, and the house shortly afterward. His money went soon after that, and his mind had almost joined it after the only job he could get was town drunk for a while. He'd been sleeping in his car for a month when it got repossessed, and when that happened, he was out of options. With nowhere else to go, he'd resorted to sleeping on the street, hoping he wouldn't wake up with a knife in his gut. Instead, he woke up naked and cold, the flesh of his back pressed against something cool and metal. He felt a sinking feeling in his gut, the same feeling he'd had when his buddies assured him the area was secure, or when his wife told him she wasn't acting weird and he was just imagining things. He tried to move his left arm, but couldn't. He couldn't move. All he could see was the ceiling, a mass of gray metal inset with harsh lights. Squinting against the glare, he could almost see intricate markings all along the metal, like bizarre hieroglyphs or cuneiform. There was a low thrumming in the air, like high-tension power lines, and a smell like ozone and blood. He tried to move his left arm again. He failed. He could feel the muscles clenching, but something was keeping him from directing the limb up. Restraints? It was then that he had to admit what was happening to him. There had always been rumors about people being abducted by aliens, but it was not established as a chilling fact until late in the fall of 2030. UFOs began to appear openly in the sky over major cities, sometimes merely observing, but other times plucking people from the streets or their homes with levitation beams of white and silver. The militaries of the world were quick to act, but never quick enough. The fastest interceptors mankind could produce arriving minutes after the raiders left. Missiles emplaced around cities failed to lock on correctly. Anti-air cannons just weren't enough, and so the alien raiders made off with cargoes of citizenry. Most people taken were never seen again, but some were. They were never the same. Those that survived were always altered in some crippling fashion, their minds or bodies shattered by the experience. Sometimes they would be incapable of speech, chattering nonsense at shadows for the rest of their days. Sometimes they were beset with seizures and tremors. Sometimes they returned with odd lumps or growths that were not there before. Occasionally, surgery would find and remove metal bits hidden here and there in the unfortunates' bodies. Sometimes doing so would be fatal, but sometimes they would return in pieces, in gory states that turned the stomach of even the most hardened country coroner. People had heard about cattle mutilation for decades, but it was forgotten after 2030 as people saw the new horror waiting for them: people mutilation. Corpses were discovered with their organs removed, their blood drained, limbs amputated, or in some disquieting cases, with new limbs, organs, or blood added. Foul play by fellow humans was immediately ruled out. These bizarre corpses were uniformly left in vast fields, sometimes hundreds of miles from the poor victim's last known location. Specifically, they were found among circles and designs burned into the ground, burns pulsing with weak but noticeable radiation. All of this flashed through Larry's head in a moment, and he wondered if the ship had caught him in a daring, brazen raid, or if he joined the legion of people who had just gone missing. A wet cough drew his attention. He braced himself to see an alien face move into his vision, but instead, a very human voice called out to him, weak and worn.
"Hey, you awake?"
Larry could not move his arms or legs, but found with great effort he could move his head towards the sound. When he did, he saw the walls of the chamber were like the ceiling, metal, gray, and inscribed. Off to the side was an imposing hatch like an iris valve, sealed and silent for now. There were containers of some sort arranged around the walls, all at waist height, a handful of bizarre devices like computers with bundles of dark metal tendrils stationed between them. The only other furnishing the chamber had was another table, a cold, gray, bare thing with no features save several metal boxes and protrusions attached to the edges. On that table was an old man, stripped from the waist up. Thin red lines covered his shallow chest, indicating some previous procedure done to him in the recent past. The old man looked at him with watery, wide eyes.
"Hey,"
he said. "I'm awake," Larry replied. "I guess asking where we are is kinda useless."
"Yeah,"
the old man wheezed.
"almost as useless as trying to get off these tables."
Larry blinked, then squinted at the old man. It was then he realized the old man wasn't being restrained by anything. "What are you talking about? They've got no bindings on you. Get up," Larry said, his voice stopping short of a shout. "Get off the table and come get these restraints off me."
"What?"
The old man's face scrunched up in confusion.
"What are you talking about? You've got no restraints on you."
"Then how?"
"Some kind of muscle paralysis or force field is my guess,"
the old man said.
"Think about it. Do you feel anything keeping your arms and legs down?"
Larry had to admit he did not. He simply couldn't move them. So why could he move his head around? "What's with the red bits? What did they do to you?" Larry asked. The old man laughed weakly.
"Hell if I know. They cut me open, poked around inside, removed a thing or two and put them in jars, then sealed me back up."
The old man's face tightened.
"It hurt. A lot. Best you get prepared for pain, boy."
"Old-timer, sometimes I think my entire life's been pain," Larry said. "What about you? You gonna be okay? People generally don't do well after having bits removed from them."
No, they don't,"
the old man said, a resigned smile on his face.
"But I don't think it's gonna matter too much. You ever been on a farm, boy?"
"No," Larry said.
"I have,"
the old man said.
"Been a farmer all my life. Been stuck in this room for weeks. They come in and jam tubes into me every day or so. Put stuff in, suck stuff out. When you raise livestock, there's a certain level of care you take with them. A good farmer treats the animal well,
knowing it's gonna either keep you fed or pay your bills with its life. You owe it that much. A farmer who isn't looking to raise or keep the animal, they treat it like these monsters here. And trust me, boy, to these things, we are animals. Maybe, but if they were out hunting for cattle, they really screwed up, Larry said. He tried to move his arms again, put all of his concentration and strength into it. Did his left arm move a little bit? Was he imagining it? He smiled anyway. All they got was a devil dog with nothing to lose. The old man laughed again, then spoke. You're a real firecracker, huh? I like you, kid. When I was... The hatch on the wall hissed. Then the metal iris began to open, its many parts retracting into the walls with the sound of metal sliding over metal. 2 diminutive humanoids waddled through, pushing a cart of some sort with them. Larry could see the cart held a carefully organized array of ominous-looking tools. Some looked very sharp, and others glowed with internal power, but they all looked painful. The aliens themselves were the same stereotype Larry had seen in a dozen old sci-fi movies before it had all made the jump from fiction to reality. Thin, weak limbs, a big head with big, dark eyes, no nose, gray skin, small mouth. Larry wouldn't have found them intimidating at all if they hadn't gotten him paralyzed and stuck to an alien operating table. He grit his teeth and redoubled his efforts. His legs, maybe one of his legs. No, they wouldn't move either. It's always these 2, son, the old man said. Or maybe it's not. Maybe they all look alike. I don't know. But they'll poke and prod for a while before things get really unpleasant. The aliens were inspecting each of the cruel-looking tools on the cart. The old man gulped, then spoke again. If it's not too much trouble, could I ask you for a favor? Sure, Larry said, testing his right leg. Nothing. The old man rattled off an address. If they do end up letting you go and you're one of the ones that can still talk, can you make sure my dog's okay? Larry didn't have the heart to tell the old man that if he'd been here for weeks and needed someone to check on his dog, the poor canine was probably already gone. Sure, Larry said, eyes fixed on the aliens. One of them was checking the boxes on the sides of the tables. They shimmered, and a tiny display that wasn't there before winked into existence. The alien poked and prodded the glowing letters on the display, changing them until he was satisfied, and both displays vanished into the metal again. Oh, good, the old man sighed. She won't give you no trouble. She's a terrible watchdog 'cause she's so friendly. Her name's Star. I know, I'm no good with names, The old man was cut off as one of the aliens produced a long, translucent tube and suddenly jammed it down the old man's throat. Muffled screams and horrible gagging sounds came from his mouth as his head thrashed around, the rest of him held fast by the table's invisible force. Larry temporarily ceased his struggles as he looked on in sick fascination. The other alien selected a tool that looked like a strangely curved scalpel and flicked a stud at its end. The blade began to glow red, and the little alien nodded in satisfaction. Then he took the scalpel to the old man. Larry wasn't even a third through his life, but he had still seen a lot of horror in it. The aftermath of artillery shelling. Bombs exploded in busy market streets. Knife attacks that let things spill out that had no business seeing open air. None of it compared to what he saw that alien do to that old man. Flaps of skin were carefully cut, then removed. Bone was sliced through and organs cut out. Not a thing or two, but all of it. Larry was witnessing a vivisection, and it turned even his war-hardened stomach. Through it all, the old man tried to scream, stopped only by the thing down his throat. Finally, he stopped. The old man had been tough, surviving weeks of abuse in this alien hell, but this time he did not survive. The only part of him he could still move, his head, finally stilled, his eyes closed as the aliens continued their bloody work, heedless of his death. Larry looked on, and something within him began to boil. Then he heard them make an odd chittering sound as they both shifted around something on the table. Larry got the distinct impression they were laughing. They'd just killed somebody and desecrated their corpse, and they were laughing about it. The boiling spread to his entire body, and Larry's heart beat faster and faster. Flashes of memory splashed over his vision, bodies bleeding out into the sand, screaming over a blisteringly hot wind, and the endless chatter of gunfire. Lesser memories crept in at the edges, the look of scorn from his ex-wife, the quiet conversation from his boss about how he should seek employment elsewhere, nights spent bundled up in the back of his car, his only companion a bottle. And over it all, he saw the 2 4-foot monsters in front of him, playing around with the death of a decent man. Something within him broke. Like a boiler exploding from too much pressure, whatever force was keeping him bound to the table was suddenly not enough. A scream ripped out of his mouth that seemed to come from his very core. The aliens didn't even turn towards the sound, so confident they were in their table. Their cruelty may have prepared their death warrants, but their arrogance signed them. Larry vaulted off the metal table and grabbed both of the aliens by the backs of their big, bulbous heads. Conscious thought had fled Larry. There was only rage and instinct now, and that dread pair only told him to kill. He slammed the 2 greys against the edge of the operating table again and again and again, until the huge skulls split like overripe melons, leaking gray-black fluid over Larry's arms. Some distant part of Larry's mind wondered at how easy it was. The greys were so fragile, so flimsy. It was like breaking a cheap toy. The 2 aliens spasmed for a moment and then went still, Larry flinging the corpses aside with as much care as they had shown the old man. The rage subsided just long enough to let thought back in, and Larry took a moment to look at the old man. There wasn't even anything to cover the mutilated body with. He bent his head and gave the old man a moment of silence, then began to tear the room apart, looking for anything to help him escape. He found his clothes wrapped in some sort of flimsy plastic, tagged with alien glyphs. He tore open the packages and quickly dressed, happy to no longer be naked in this terrible place. Having pockets would also come in handy, as he selected the most dangerous-looking of the tools the aliens had brought on their cart and stuffed them into his pockets, keeping the glowing scalpel in his hand. Raw aggression had been enough for the first 2, but who knows what else the UFO had in store for him. He grinned savagely as he saw that the iris door was still open. He stalked towards it, emerging into a long curved hall, a low mist clinging to the floor. Larry wasn't sure how long he spent prowling the humid corridors of the ship. Though he had regained enough awareness to temper his anger with intelligence, he was still operating under a red haze. As he crept through the ship, he settled into a violent routine. He would find an alien, or one would find him, and they would die. His mind would tingle as they stared at him, and for a brief moment he would feel an urge to lie down and sleep. That urge would then be crushed by the roiling anger surging through every one of his veins, and the aliens would meet his fists until they stopped moving. They would raise batons with glowing ends that sparked with electricity. He would rip them out of their hands and shove them down their throats, still activated. They would shake and jerk and burn, and he would laugh. Then he would move on. The ones with guns barely got the chance to raise them. Time had done a number on Larry, but he was still a McMap brown belt in all 4 disciplines. In the cramped confines of the ship, he moved too fast and too viciously for the alien crew. Their guns dropped from shattered wrists seconds after they were drawn. Their throats collapsed from precise strikes moments later. The anger was doing more than driving him now. It was waking him up. A part of him he'd hoped he would never need again seethed, slowly emerging from the broken glass of old memories. Larry picked up a gun and inspected it. It looked more like a child's toy than a weapon. He pointed it down the hall and gave the trigger an experimental pull. Nothing happened. He frowned and tossed the weapon aside. Some sort of safety lock. Good thing he didn't need it. Finally, Larry came to a door that was different from the others. Unlike the iris doors, this one was more like a standard hatch, and it had far more of the intricate writing around it. Like every other door on the ship, there was no visible control to make it open. Larry thought for a moment. It didn't look like the aliens in the dissection room had done anything. They'd just walked in, the door opening automatically. He snapped his fingers and walked back to one of the aliens he'd killed in the hall. Grabbing the spindly arms, he dragged it through the corridor, then tossed it at the hatch. The door made an odd sound as the body neared it, then slid into the ceiling, as Larry thought it might. The doors were triggered by alien proximity. Beyond the door was what appeared to be the control center of the ship, an array of monitors and displays flashing bizarre glyphs and designs all around a central chair. On that chair was another one of the Greys, but different. Its head was 4 times the size of its body, bulging with bumps and veins and sickly pulsing as Larry watched. The chair was built to support the being, the upper part cradling the massive cranium while clusters of dark cables snaked from it to the control stations around the room. It flailed its arms weakly as Larry approached, clenching his fists. "Looking for help?" Larry asked. "You'll be waiting for a long time. I was thorough." "Human, stop!" the alien said. Larry's eyes shot open. He wasn't expecting a response. None of the others had tried to communicate, even with gestures. It took a moment for Larry to realize he hadn't heard anything. The message had gone straight to his mind. "Why should I?" Larry asked, taking another step forward. "No benefit, kill!" the alien wheezed. "Great benefit, spare! Take whatever you want! Give gifts, weapons, cures, knowledge! Ship and I, connected! Kill me, ship dies! You die! Spare!" "You know, that's an interesting offer," Larry said, taking another step forward. The alien flinched in his great chair, unable to move, unable to escape, just like he and the old man had been when the dissectors came from them. "I was wondering how I could ever escape, not knowing how to fly one of these things myself. How would I get home?" Larry snapped his fingers again, the alien wincing at the gesture. "But that's the problem, little guy. I don't have a home anymore. I don't really have anything. All I have now is a grudge, a desire to tear apart cruel, torturous bastards like yourself. Even with all of your stuff, I'm not sure I could live knowing I let you go. But really, there's a bigger issue at play here, and that's the chance you'd backstab me the moment you could. There's exactly one lesson I've learned in the 34 years I've been alive." Larry was looming over the alien now, cracking his knuckles and smiling, his arms dripping with blackish ichor. He leaned down to whisper in the alien's ear. "You just can't trust a real son of a bitch." The alien screeched as Larry fell on him, fists slamming into the frail body again and again, breaking bone, smashing cartilage, pulping flesh. The more Larry struck the screaming creature, the angrier he got, all the brutality and suffering he'd ever seen in his life boiling over in his mind. He was barely conscious of how the alien's screams turned to low moans of horror as he let his rage overtake him. Suddenly, there was angry alien chittering all around him. The displays were activating and showing image feeds from other ships, pictures of other big-brained immobile aliens clutching their heads and screaming as others around them frantically worked the controls. Larry knew he did something, but he couldn't know the scope of what he'd done with that simple act of primal rage. The highly psychic sculders, for that was what the Greys were actually called, were used on all ships of the foremost empire to maintain a psionic network. This network was used for communication, coordination, navigation, ship control, and to fuel the various psychic devices that were installed into foremost ships. Larry had just vented a lifetime's worth of rage and anger into a highly receptive psychic node while also beating it to death. The sheer rage and brutality was absorbed by the dying Skulder like a sponge, sending it rippling through the network like a rabid virus. All of the other Skulder navigators around Earth, on ships ranging from foremost command cruisers to Sysrath Earthborers, began to scream, feeling every blow inflicted onto their brother. Their screams only grew in volume as more and more of Larry's fury burned their delicate synapses, an immense amount of rage they had never felt before in their long lives. Pure hatred for all the suffering the invaders had inflicted on the people of Earth was pumped through their cold, orderly minds. Organs burst, blood and ichor flowed from every orifice. They began to spasm, falling into seizures as their shipmates struggled to find out what was going on and keep their vessels flying. Finally, one by one, each navigator died, and with them, the central control system of each Empire ship. All around Earth, UFOs began to act erratically, their psychic controllers sending conflicting orders to the machines as their neurons overloaded and died one by one. They wobbled in the sky, crashing into mountains, forests, and plains as the order was given for sudden thrust in a direction already occupied by the ground. They uncloaked and stood stock still near cities, their raiding plans torn asunder as missile defenses and anti-air cannon were finally given the time needed to lock on and fire. Interceptors took to the sky en masse from every nation that had them, scouring the skies for the suddenly vulnerable aliens. Abductees found the psychic fields holding them down suddenly vanish. The aliens in the middle of torturing them suddenly found themselves on the wrong end of bloody revenge as they jumped from the dissection tables and grappled with their captors, a grim reenactment of what had started the entire thing. Chaos engulfed the globe as humans finally had their chance to strike back at the monsters that had been terrorizing them for years, and they took it. As their fellows struggled to survive amidst the consequences of their own cruelty, the Skulder navigators slumped in their chairs and began to rot. The crew of the few ships that managed to flee into space would be put down later for fear of the alien mind virus spreading, the foremost sparing no kindness even for their servants. Larry had literally hated the aliens to death. That thought kept him calm, the anger finally leaving his body as he watched the planet on the displays get bigger and bigger. He felt peace. For the first time in years, he felt okay. It was going to end, but that was fine. He'd done all he could, and it was finally enough. Warning glyphs flashed red on the displays as the ship re-entered the atmosphere, but there was no helping that. Larry didn't know which controls to... The thought suddenly struck Larry that he'd seen which controls manipulated the ship. It was only for a brief time, but when the displays had the angry aliens on them, he saw them frantically trying to fly their out-of-control ships with the cluster of levers and buttons on the left control station. The calm didn't leave Larry as he leisurely examined the panel and began to test the controls. This would have been a fine way to go out, but if his luck was going to change, why not? He pulled levers, pushed buttons, and gently moved what he judged to be a control stick around. Dying while trying to fly an alien saucer was more stylish than just watching it all end on the screens anyway. When the UFO came streaking down from the sky like a comet, its complete lack of grace in descending saved it. Selfridge Air National Guard Base would have normally blown it out of the air with its ground defenses, even if its planes weren't already deployed in the massive global alien hunt. As it was, the crews manning the guns and launchers had figured the UFO had already been shot down by someone else, which wasn't too far from the truth. Now, when it became clear the UFO was going to crash on the base's grounds, the crews scrambled to open fire, hoping to knock it off course. This became difficult as the UFO suddenly slowed down, sped up, and slowed down again, causing a loss of target each time. Some of the crews opened fire anyway, and automated systems in the UFO expelled a glittering gas. The missiles exploded just a hair too soon, and the UFO wobbled, then dropped straight down like a stone. It wasn't quite a crash, and it wasn't quite a landing, but it made soldiers boil out of the base's armory with hand grenades and rifles all the same. It was a testament to their discipline that they held fire long enough when the main hatch of the saucer opened to reveal a human being splattered in black blood. Larry Sammons dizzily weaved out of the ship and collapsed onto the freshly cut grass of the base, his last words before losing consciousness a mystery to the troops that surrounded him. "Shorter than the chair force makes it look," he mumbled. Then he slipped into peaceful darkness. When he woke up, Larry found he had a long list of people in suits he had to talk to. His face was quite famous, recordings of him beating the alien controller to death frozen on several of the displays recovered from crashed and recovered UFOs. The leaders of his country were quite keen to meet him, and keener to learn what exactly he'd done. Larry wasn't sure himself, but he was happy to tell his tale, at least the first 12 times. By the 20th time it had gotten annoying, and he strongly suspected this was intentional to make sure he never changed his story. By the 30th time he'd finally been given a spare room at the base and told to get some rest. While Larry slept, the globe was swept clean of the interstellar bandits that had plagued it. The mightiest of Earth's nations had reaped a deadly harvest of salvaged technology and crashed ships for their troubles, but even the smaller countries managed to leave the conflict with one small trophy or two. While secret laboratories and hangars stuffed themselves with the spoils of war, pieces of authentic aliens and their forbidden technology made the rounds on the black market. Sealed jars of alien liquids and organs were sold for outrageous sums, a grim parody of the same trading that had brought some of the aliens to Earth to begin with. The leaders of the various alien species raiding Earth had thought of the populace as cattle for their use, but humans are not cattle. Humans are not even wolves or lions. Humans are humans, and that's the most dangerous beast of all. The farmhouse was old, but not run down. It looked to Larry like it had been very well taken care of prior to its owner's disappearance, and that had only happened weeks ago. The farm itself wasn't doing quite as well, the fields laying fallow, and the barn empty save for some old hay and stray cats who were nestling lazily in the straw. Stalls for cattle were bare, not having been used for some time. Larry sighed in relief and shifted in the suit the government had been kind enough to provide him. At least he wouldn't have to deal with starving cows. He screwed up his courage and walked to the house, searching for the key. It was right where the old man had said it was, in the mailbox, engraved with the name McPherson. "So that was your name, old-timer," Larry muttered to himself as he opened the door. "Wish I'd heard it from your own lips." The door had barely opened before a tumble of long, brown, black and white fur burst past him, barking and yipping. Larry took a step back to maintain his balance as a fully grown Shetland sheepdog licked and pawed at him. His eyes widened. The dog was alive. How? Just beyond the avalanche of fur, Larry could see a kitchen area with a big bag of dog chow ruthlessly torn open. Only a little bit was left inside. He laughed and looked down to the dog, who was still ecstatic at seeing a live human and being outside for the first time in weeks. "I guess you got tired of waiting, so you served yourself, huh? Don't want to guess where you got the water from," Larry said. He reached out tentatively to the dog. "Star, sit." The dog looked at him attentively and sat down, still panting. She whined and sniffed the air. Larry grimaced and patted his pockets. "Sorry, Star. No treats on me today. But let's see if your master left some on a shelf, huh? I'll get you some fresh water, too," Larry said, entering the home. He wondered idly if the old man had had relatives with claim to it. Probably not. if the dog was still here and no one had checked on the place. Maybe he could swing around some of his newfound influence and get an advance big enough to buy the property once everything was settled. Saving the Earth had to be worth something, after all, even if he was already being paid more money than he'd ever seen as an alien combat consultant. As he scratched the dog behind the ears before finding a crinkly opened package of dog treats in a cabinet, he smiled. Maybe he was right all along, and his bad luck had finally run out. He fed the dog, then went to make some calls to see if pets could be allowed on the base.